Now we are in Murtoa, which is in the wheat belt of Victoria, in the Wimmera, and it's a town of less than 2,000 people, about 2 hours northwest of Ballarat and about 3 hours northwest of Melbourne. And when you talk about architectural and cultural icons in Australia, people talk about the Sydney Opera House and things like that. Some of the remarkable buildings, but few people will be aware of the existence of this. And this is known as the Murtoa #1 grain store, known colloquially by locals as the stick shed, and in a moment you'll see why it's called that. And it's the only remaining emergency grain store built during World War II. And the background history and story to this is the breadbasket and grain belt for Australia. And in the late 30s and early 40s, there were bumper harvests of grain and wheat. And the fact that the Second World War was in full swing in Europe and the ports were closed meant that there was no market for it. It couldn't be exported. And so as an emergency response, the government initiated the construction of what was then supposed to be temporary storage facilities. They referred to as bulkheads, and then commonly known as emergency wheat storage sheds, as the bulk silos and current grain storage filled up. In 1941-42, with a bumper Victorian crop looming, it became critical that an immediate solution to the problem was found, and the Victorian Grain Elevators Board decided to construct the first Victorian shed here at Murtoa, which was an important railway siding. In 1941, the Grain Elevators Board commissioned the stick shed, and it all happened very, very quickly, as you would suggest they do when emergency situations arise. On September the 6th of 1941, Councillor H. Evans offered 5 acres of land here at Murtoa, which was accepted. 4 days later, tenders for everything except the concrete floor were opened, and the work started on the 27th of September. So that's 3 weeks from woe to go. The designs for the stick shed were prepared in the months before the final site was chosen, and other bulk wheat storages were built around Australia before and after the stick shed. But only it, and one now demolished at Denali, had the same level of receival and dispersal technology built in. Now, we love some statistics. Doesn't look that impressive from outside, but wait until you get inside. Shed is 265 metres long, 60 metres wide, 19 metres high, and holds 3.5 million bushels of wheat. That's just shy of 100,000 tonnes of wheat. Green Brothers contractors of Bendigo undertook the construction in September of 1941, and much of it was constructed with little mechanical aid and a limited workforce due to the war. There was a steel shortage due to the war, which meant the shed was built largely from readily available timber, and some 560, that's 56 rows by 10 of unmilled mountain ash poles were erected into dug footings in the ground, and concrete was manually poured around the footings. Galvanised hoop iron was used in most structural joints, and this contributes to the building's ability and capacity to survive as it gives structural ability to move and shift due to internal stresses, due to high winds and changes of temperature. And believe me, out here in the Wimmera it gets really, really hot. There are over 150 tons of corrugated iron on the roof, which covers 16,000 square meters of land, and the roof angle was sloped to reflect the same angle of a pile of wheat forms naturally. This has an annual runoff of about 35 megalitres of water per annum. Incredibly, the stick shed was constructed only in 4 months, a real display of persistence and determination by a government who wanted a valuable commodity protected as soon as possible. Forgive me if I wax lyrical a bit, but this is a agricultural and construction wonder of the world. It's an agricultural cathedral, and when you see inside, and I'm advised that I am allowed to fly my drone inside, you will see that the analogy of a cathedral is not misplaced. So if you're coming through the Wimmera, Murtoa isn't really on the way to anywhere. It's a little bit, I don't know if you can see, but the hills over there are the Grampians. And as I turn around, I notice that we seem to have a bit of an issue developing behind us. Let's hope they're just burning off. But that inconspicuous entrance is the entrance to the stick shed. So let's go and have a look. Let's get the drone up, see what it looks like from inside.
flight distance reached. Max flight distance reached.